Several new details this morning about the failed Republican candidate from the New Mexico State House who was arrested after allegedly orchestrating a series of shootings at the homes of Democratic officials. Solomon Pena, a staunch supporter of former President Donald Trump and backer of false claims of election fraud, was denied bail yesterday during his first court hearing in Albuquerque on charges he masterminded 4 shootings and took part in at least one after he lost his state house race last November. No one was hurt in the shootings. NBC News has learned that between the November election and when the shootings began in early December, 39-year-old Pena is said to have visited the homes of multiple local officials, unsolicited and unannounced, complaining about election fraud and what he perceived to be voter inconsistencies. Joining us now, Colorado Secretary of State Jena Griswold. She's chair of the Democratic Secretaries of State and has dealt firsthand with threats of violence stemming from her work to protect her state's election system. Thank you very much for being on the show this morning. Why is what happened in New Mexico important, something we should focus on?
Well, first off, good morning, and thank you for having me on. You know, I think we all can be very relieved that no one was hurt in the New Mexico incident. But it's a clear example of how extremist language and extreme Republicans are inciting actual violence. Words have effect. They incited January 6th. They led to the attack on Paul Pelosi, the kidnapping attempt of the Michigan governor, and now these shootings. So I think it's a clear example of what many of us have been worried about for the past years, that the extremist rhetoric that many elected officials not only spread but condone leads to attacks like this. It leads to bullets flying through little girls' walls.
And you can see parallels on tiny levels to January 6th. I mean, what motivated and the lead up to and bringing people together to join you in this misbegotten journey to attack Democrats after losing by a landslide and claiming you didn't lose. There are parallels that can be made. And the question is, you know, at some point, accountability may help turn the corner for this country. But what we're seeing, Madam Secretary, is election denialism and violence pervading our politics up and down the ballot.
That's exactly right. In November, Americans overwhelmingly rejected election denialism in the states. With that said, I think this incident shows that the fight for democracy continues. And to be clear, several elected secretaries of state are now election deniers. Over 150 election deniers sit in the House, 6 in the U.S. Senate. So the fight for the soul of this country is not over. We need to recognize that words can incite violence, and elected officials and election officials cannot live in an atmosphere of political violence, because it does affect our ability to run free and fair elections and preserve American democracy for the American people.
Secretary Griswold, good morning. We should be specific to our viewers that you know from experience. There's a man from Nebraska sitting in prison right now for 1.5 years for making very specific threats to you. Thank God there was intervention before he carried out any of those threats. But why are you a threat? Why are secretaries of state like you so threatening to so many people? Why are people threatening your life, for example? What is the work that has drawn the outrage of people like the man in prison in Nebraska?
Well, I could jokingly say that sometimes I show my arms in the state capitol. But in all seriousness, I think secretaries of state are the fair arbiters of elections in this country. We're there to make sure that every Republican, Democrat, and unaffiliated voter can have their voices heard. But we are seeing, as part of the attack on democracy, the removal of good election officials to put election deniers in their place. And that can have various effects. In Colorado, for example, we had a local county clerk, the local election administrator, embrace the big lie and compromise her own voting systems. So what I think we need to see from this country at both the federal and state level is, number one, clearly making it a crime to retaliate or threaten elected officials like we've done in Colorado. We also need prosecutors to step up and prosecute. We need states to stop the voter suppression and open up access. But more than just that, I think we have to get to the root of the problem. And the reason that these conspiracy theorists have been able to have such a big voice in American politics is that we need to reform our system. We need to recommit this country to democracy and show Americans that to have a better future and a better life, we need a strong democracy. And that includes reforming campaign finance, opening up access to the ballot box to eligible people, stopping gerrymandering, and making sure this government actually delivers results for everyday people.
Yeah. You know, and Elise, I know you have this next question, but I mean, it also involves we all Americans agreeing that January 6th was a bad thing. I mean, I talk about the roots of Trumpism or fascism, however you want to look at it, and he has damaged our democracy in so many ways. The fire hose of falsehoods, denigrating the truth, alternative facts. It's led to actual members of Congress calling a riot and deadly insurrection defaming and leaving their own feces on our Capitol, pretending that was just a regular day that, happened, that was a tour. I mean, this is alternative facts pervading our democracy and pervading vulnerable minds.
It's so upsetting because what Donald Trump did was he contested the notion that America's elections are free and fair. And we're such an example all around the world. And Americans need to trust in their system. And so, Secretary, what I would ask you are the chair of an organization of Democratic Secretary of States. And within Colorado, you have implemented a lot of reforms, such as a task force to deal with cyber intervention in an election, such as an easy way for Colorado residents to check if they're correctly registered to vote. Have these reforms been happening across the nation, and what needs to be done?
We have seen the expansion of accessible elections, especially during 2020, as the country quickly expanded vote by mail for all, which reduces barriers and actually increases security because foreign and domestic hackers cannot interfere with ballots that are on paper. With that said, over the last several years, we have seen a tremendous backslide for the right to vote and access. We are seeing voter suppression laws continuing to be introduced and discussed in state houses across the country. We are seeing an increase of election deniers. We're seeing these attacks on democracy. And I think it's worth noting that Republican elected officials who do not fully spew out lies, but say, well, maybe the election was stolen, or we should really investigate this conspiracy, they are part of the problem. They are part of the problem for not standing up and clearly stating facts and reassuring Americans that our elections are safe and secure.
Colorado Secretary of State Jena Griswold, thank you. And I would add to that not just those that say maybe, I would add to that those that say nothing. You have to say something. If you say nothing, you're in. You're in with Michael. Have you heard? Has there been any response to this case from Republicans on Capitol Hill?
So the House is out of session this week. The Senate is out of session this week. So when that happens, lawmakers tend to not comment on issues if they don't want to. But we did see a glimpse into this issue of threats against lawmakers this week. The United States Capitol Police released the yearly numbers for those threats against lawmakers. And while the numbers did decrease from the past 2 years, from 2021 and 2020, Capitol Police said that the numbers are just way too high. And we had a lot of discussion about this as we saw the hearings for the January 6th committee underway. Of course, during the attack on Paul Pelosi, there was a lot of discussion about these threats against lawmakers. It's a real issue in the country, and the numbers are showing that these other stories that we just saw that we're seeing right now play out in New Mexico is underscoring that issue. And the Capitol Police, they released their numbers this week, and it really did show that the numbers, while they're trending down from blowing up amid January 6th, they're still too high.
So, Michael, what's your